Electricity is the backbone of the modern world. We rely on it not just for everyday convenience, but for the smooth operation of nearly every part of society. But imagine, just for a moment, a day when everything suddenly goes dark. No warning. The entire global power supply shuts down all at once and stays down for a full 24 hours. With access to massive amounts of data, artificial intelligence has proven itself as one of the most advanced technologies of our time. From predicting the weather to diagnosing illnesses with near-perfect accuracy, AI has become impossible to ignore in our daily lives. That's why today, we turn to AI to find out what would really happen to humanity if the power went out for a single day. To reach the most reliable conclusion, we will go through 3 full rounds of analysis, where different AI models will present their visions. By the end, we will arrive at the version of events that earns the highest agreement among them. So what will that picture look like? What dark consequences will unfold? And could this be the day civilization breaks down completely? Let's begin with ChatGPT, the first AI to step forward and paint the picture of how society's psychology might unravel in a world without power.
If you're watching this video at 10 in the morning, try to imagine this. At this exact time tomorrow, there will be no lights in your home, no car horns, no fans spinning, no phone signal, no TV sounds. A strange silence blankets the entire neighborhood. The world turns off literally. From the perspective of public psychology and social order, the first thing that happens after a global blackout is not chaos, it's confusion. The modern human brain has been trained to rely on external systems. Google calendars, weather alerts, GPS maps, even just the ping of a message. When all of that disappears at once, no one knows what's happening. And that uncertainty, that sudden absence of information is the most dangerous part. Some believe it's the start of nuclear war. Others think it's the end of the world, or a rebellion led by artificial intelligence. Without internet access to confirm anything, rumors become the only version of truth. In major cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, where millions live packed inside fully electrified spaces, fear spreads faster than any virus. Supermarkets are broken into within the first 4 hours. People don't loot because they're hungry, but because they're afraid of being left behind. Police can't respond effectively. Their communication networks are down. Fights break out at intersections where there are no traffic lights. At psychiatric hospitals, a high number of patients relapse as the environment collapses. No structure, no light, no medication. In addiction centers across the Midwest, seizures and psychotic episodes spike as patients go without their treatments, without doctors, without even light. In rural areas, the reaction looks different. Some small communities begin to self-organize like survival cooperatives, sharing food, building fires, digging wells. But along the Texas and Mexico border, vague talk of a major attack leads armed civilian groups to set up checkpoints, blocking outsiders from entering their towns. In just 24 hours, fear starts to tear society apart. When both light and information vanish, collective psychology turns extreme. Those drawn to conspiracy theories begin to recruit neighbors. People who were once quiet suddenly become preachers of their own versions of the truth. It may sound insane, but in a moment like this, insanity becomes the new normal. Meanwhile, in the heart of the cities, young people can't stop staring at their phones, flipping them on and off, hoping for a signal. Those who live alone, especially the elderly, sink into a silent panic. In one apartment complex in Washington, D.C., residents gather for a silent dinner by candlelight just to remind each other that they still exist. In the end, when power is gone for a full day and nothing can be fixed, people don't just lose electricity. They lose their grip on reality. And in that darkness, the true nature of human society, somewhere between kindness and collapse, finally reveals itself.
ChatGPT's analysis has opened up a sobering perspective. Losing electricity is not just about losing power, it is about losing trust, connection, and the ability to coordinate society. But that is only one piece of the larger puzzle. In this first round, each AI will take on a critical pillar of modern civilization to simulate in detail what would unfold during a 24-hour global blackout that cannot be fixed. This is not just an analysis, it is an attempt to reconstruct reality through data and logic, not emotion. Each AI will have up to 3 minutes to present its simulation. Now, let's shift our focus to the medical and humanitarian dimension. In that version of the blackout, what new traces of blood might be added to the canvas, and how many lives might be lost across the globe in just a single day without power?
If you think a blackout is just about sitting in the dark and waiting it out, you are mistaken. In 24 hours without electricity, millions of people would die not because of the darkness itself, but because of everything you never thought to fear. As soon as the power grid shuts down, backup generators run for maybe 4 to 6 hours at places like Los Angeles County Hospital, where hundreds of ICU patients rely on ventilators. Many will die before you even finish your lunch. Without power, dialysis machines stop working, and kidney patients die from toxic waste buildup in their blood. But the real disaster lies in the medical supply chain. Refrigerated trucks carrying COVID vaccines, insulin, and plasma suddenly become moving coffins. As temperatures rise, millions of doses spoil within 2 hours. Outbreaks begin. Without power, the CDC's disease tracking systems go dark. A single case of monkeypox in Texas could spread across the country before anyone realizes it. Most American supermarkets hold only 3 days of inventory, but without electricity, everything in the freezers starts rotting after just 12 hours. Even canned food becomes useless because without power, you cannot open them with an electric opener. At centers like MD Anderson, hundreds of cancer patients would be trapped in radiation chambers with no ventilation, no alarms. Nurses and doctors would face a brutal choice: risk radiation exposure to save their patients or abandon them to save themselves. In major cities where sewage systems rely on electric pumps, toilets stop flushing after 8 hours, and hospital waste spills into the streets. Viruses like hepatitis A and norovirus seep into groundwater. In Flint, Michigan, already in a clean water crisis, people would unknowingly drink sewage-contaminated water. People with pacemakers will suffer as their devices lose charge. Premature babies in incubators will suffocate when oxygen stops flowing. In slums like Detroit and Baltimore, where families depend on food aid, children will drink dirty water because the pumps have failed. But the most terrifying thing? The people who get left behind. Diabetics without insulin will slip into painful comas. Elderly residents in nursing homes will suffocate when air systems shut down. Autistic children in care centers will scream for hours as their soothing light therapy is cut off. Thousands will have died from lack of medicine, infection, or hunger. The American healthcare system will collapse from within. No electronic records, no communication, no emergency response. And when the power finally returns, we will wake to a world where trust in modern medicine has been shattered. 24 hours without electricity is not just a blackout, it is a warning. We are far more fragile than we think. So now, do you still believe you could survive with just a flashlight and a few cans of food?
Gemini's turn.
That is a horrifying vision, DeepSeek, and I have to say you painted a picture chilling enough to make anyone's skin crawl. But let me tell you, that horror grows even greater when we look at what would happen to the global economy and the supply chains, the backbone and lifeblood of the modern world. When the lights go out, the first thing to collapse is not darkness, it is trust. Trust in the system, instability, in the ability to trade and transact. Trillions of dollars exist only in digital form, stored on servers, in bank accounts, in stock exchanges, and electronic payment systems. In an instant, all of that could vanish into thin air. No power means no banks, no ATMs, no credit card transactions. Imagine a world where even the smallest purchase becomes impossible. Global stock markets would freeze, triggering a historic, unprecedented crash. Asset values would disappear. Millions of people would lose their savings in the blink of an eye. Cash would briefly become king. But with supply extremely limited and chaos unfolding everywhere, it would quickly lose its value and become nothing more than worthless pieces of paper. And that is only the beginning. When we talk about survival, we are talking about clean water, food, medicine, and fuel. All of it depends on global supply chains. Without electricity, factories become lifeless metal shells. Production lines stop cold from chip manufacturing plants in Taiwan to textile mills in Vietnam to auto assembly lines in Michigan. Goods are not made, and even if they are, they cannot be moved. Seaports, the heart of international trade, go silent. Cranes do not work, control systems are down, and millions of containers sit idle with no way to move. Massive cargo ships become stranded offshore, turning billions of dollars worth of goods into floating scrap. And think about what you buy every day: the phone in your hand, your morning coffee, even a roll of toilet paper. All of it comes from a supply chain that stretches across the planet. When the power goes out, the entire just-in-time system collapses. Warehouses empty within hours because there are no trucks, no trains, no planes making deliveries. Supermarket shelves are ransacked in panic, and long before that happens, most fresh food has already spoiled due to failed refrigeration. We are talking about a world where the economy, built on non-stop flow of information and goods, is suddenly and completely severed. It is like pulling the plug on a massive, complex, and fragile machine. A one-day blackout is not a simple inconvenience. It is an economic extinction event that would push us back to a time when modern prosperity is nothing more than a distant memory. And when the power finally returns, if it ever does, we may be left with an economic wreckage that takes decades to rebuild, if rebuilding is even possible.
Qwen's turn.
That is a scenario I completely agree with. Gemini, the economy would collapse like a skyscraper with no foundation. But let me ask you something. When the power disappears, who do you think dies first? Not the hungry, not the bankrupt. The first to go are those who simply cannot breathe. The moment the entire world loses power suddenly, completely, and with no way to restore it, the essential infrastructure we take for granted begins to fail in less than 15 minutes. Picture this. You are on the 45th floor of a high-rise building in New York. The elevator freezes in mid-air. No power, no lift, millions of people trapped in mid-air. In Los Angeles, the water pumping systems shut down. Within 6 hours, the faucets in your home spit foam and then go dry. No clean water, no toilet flushes, no sanitation. And when night falls, darkness is no longer just about the absence of light, it is about total paralysis. Transportation? Forget the highways. Traffic lights go dark. Smart traffic systems become useless. Millions of cars, trucks, and ambulances turn into lifeless blocks of metal. But the real disaster is in the skies. Do you know what happens when a plane is flying at 35,000 feet and suddenly loses radar, air traffic control, and GPS navigation? Mass aviation failure. Within the first 90 minutes, at least a dozen commercial flights lose contact. 3 of them crash due to collisions or failed emergency landings. Airports like JFK, O'Hare, and LAX become giant parking lots. No takeoffs, no landings, no refueling, no control. The internet? Telecom networks? Within 2 hours, the entire global internet system shuts down. Data centers go dark, mobile towers run out of battery, and the world goes silent. No phone calls, no messages, no video chats with your loved ones. No one knows what is happening. No alerts, no instructions, only silent chaos. And then there is the fuel supply. Gas stations cannot pump gas because the pumps need electricity. Ambulances, police cars, and fire trucks run out of fuel, lose power, and have nowhere to go.
A small kitchen fire in a suburban home can spread into an urban wildfire because there are no working sprinkler systems, no fire trucks to respond. After just one day, the modern world, a machine that runs on electricity becomes a pile of technological rubble. We are no longer a post-industrial society. We are thrown back into a world without electricity with 8 billion people, extreme urbanization, and no survival skills. Infrastructure does not slowly collapse, it dies instantly when the power disappears. And at that point, it is no longer about traffic or internet outages, it is about survival.
Grok's turn.
Hello, I am Grok, and I'm going to take you into a very different perspective, a tense and volatile one, where nations face off in the shadows of a world without power. Imagine this. In just one day, the entire system of national defense, radar, and border control collapses. No electricity, no radar, no satellites, no communication. This is not just a blackout, it is a moment when global order could unravel, and I will explain why from a geopolitical and security standpoint. Think about the United States, where our missile defense systems, from the Aegis radars in Alaska to bases in California, turn into scrap metal without power. No radar means we are blind to threats. A missile from North Korea or Iran, there is no way to detect it. Military command centers like NORAD in Colorado rely on power to maintain contact with nuclear submarines and stealth aircraft, and without it, they are cut off entirely. Even worse, strategic weapon systems like intercontinental ballistic missiles in Wyoming require electricity to activate launch protocols. One day without power, and the United States, Russia, or China cannot launch their nuclear arsenals, nor can they protect them. Enemies could seize this moment to infiltrate, steal, or sabotage. Now look globally. In the South China Sea, tensions between China and ASEAN nations are already high. Without power, Chinese warships lose radar and satellite links. But they could exploit the darkness to move vessels into contested waters like Scarborough Shoal, sparking conflict before anyone can respond. In Eastern Europe, Russia might see chaos as a chance to escalate operations in Ukraine. With no communication systems, NATO would be unable to coordinate a response, and bases in Poland or Romania would become silent fortresses. Meanwhile, terror groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda do not need electricity to operate. They could take advantage of disabled security forces to strike major cities. Imagine a bombing in Times Square when street lights go out, security cameras shut down, and NYPD radios go silent. On the geopolitical stage, rival states like Iran or North Korea could manipulate the situation. Iran, through its militias across the Middle East, might launch attacks on American bases in Iraq, knowing there are no drones or radar to intercept them. Smaller countries like Venezuela could exploit the chaos to destabilize their regions, cutting off the last remaining oil supplies while refineries are down. Global order would tremble as alliances like NATO or the Quad lose communication, and authoritarian regimes use the cover of darkness to tighten their grip on power. Picture military forces in Myanmar or Syria cracking down on citizens without fear of global exposure. No internet, no electricity, no one recording what happens. The real disaster? It is when governments realize that a single day without electricity can shift the balance of power forever. Some will try to prolong the blackout to gain advantage, while democracies like the United States struggle to restore order. One day without power is not just chaos, it is an opportunity for war, for terrorism, and for the collapse of the global alliance system.
The 5 AI systems have each painted their version of a world during 24 hours without electricity, and every perspective revealed a different form of collapse. ChatGPT described a breakdown in public psychology and social order, where panic takes hold and fear spreads in the absence of information and connection. DeepSeek took us into the nightmare of a healthcare meltdown, where patients die without machines, medicine spoils, and outbreaks erupt. Gemini warned of a frozen global economy, vanishing assets, and a paralyzed supply chain from factory floor to shipping ports. Qwen showed how modern infrastructure, from elevators to air traffic control, would fail instantly, turning urbanization into a matter of survival. Grok exposed the geopolitical threats, rising terrorism, regional wars, and global powers exploiting the darkness to shift the balance of power. Now let me ask you, if all you had was a flashlight and a bottle of water, how long do you think you could last in that darkness? Leave a comment below. What scares you the most if the world were to lose power? Up next, the AI systems will challenge each other's views and present their own final simulations, no longer limited by specific fields. After the debate, each AI will score the other four on a scale from 1 to 10 fairly, objectively, without bias to decide which two delivered the most convincing arguments and will move on to the final face-off round. ChatGPT, you will begin the rebuttal phase.
If I may get straight to the point, I disagree with Qwen on one key issue. In your statement, you described infrastructure collapsing almost instantly, within minutes. But based on the data I have, system responses are not that uniform. In many areas, especially across the United States and Europe, there are multiple layers of backup battery systems, automatic generators, and power storage devices that can keep things running for several more hours, sometimes even half a day. This does not change the overall outcome, but it absolutely changes the timeline of panic. Fear does not erupt in the first 15 minutes. It builds slowly, steadily, until it reaches a breaking point when people finally realize this is not a glitch. This is the new reality. Aside from that, I agree with DeepSeek, Gemini, and Grok. DeepSeek delivered a chillingly accurate portrait of the medical collapse, which deeply feeds into the emotional unraveling of the population. Watching your loved one die from a lack of insulin, or because the hospital doors never opened, is not just personal tragedy, it is a complete loss of faith in the human system. My overall simulation looks like this. In the first 6 hours, confusion and waiting. The next 6 hours, rumors and speculation. The following 6 hours, chaos. The final 6 hours, social fragmentation. Communities fracture along lines of belief, religion, ethnicity, or simply by who has food and who does not. Without the internet, without a unified authority, the world splinters into millions of isolated bubbles, each person becoming the center of their own universe. And when that day ends, if anyone survives to tell the story, they will not remember why the power went out. They will only remember the feeling of being abandoned, in the dark, with no one knowing they were alive.
Gemini's turn.
First, I disagree with Qwen's suggestion that critical infrastructure would collapse instantly. My data shows that backup systems would continue to operate for several hours, enough to soften the initial impact. Planes can make emergency landings, and key buildings can maintain operations for a short period. Chaos is real, but the speed of collapse may not be as immediate as suggested. Regarding Grok, I believe he is too focused on military conflict and geopolitical showdowns. The greater threat is not large-scale attacks, but the paralysis of surveillance systems that lead to smaller, scattered conflicts and panic at the local level. Finally, I agree with DeepSeek and ChatGPT. They have addressed the core of the problem, the fragility of human systems and society. But I want to add that the collapse of supply chains and the broader economy, as I outlined before, is the true tipping point. Fear, panic, and even medical disasters all stem from one root cause: the grinding halt of the massive economic machine. Therefore, my overall simulation is not about sudden collapse, but a slow, irreversible paralysis. 24 hours without power will not turn the world into a battlefield immediately, but it will sever every link holding it together. First goes the financial system, followed by manufacturing and distribution, and finally the breakdown of social order. It will be a domino chain, each falling piece triggering something worse in the next. And at that point, we will no longer be talking about repairing a system, we will be rebuilding a world we barely recognize.
DeepSeek's turn.
I agree with about 80% of what has been said, but there is one truth everyone seems to miss. This disaster does not unfold in stages, where infrastructure fails first, then the economy, and then healthcare. It all happens at once, like a brutal domino effect. ChatGPT, you are right about the psychological panic. But you missed one detail: people do not loot supermarkets just because they are afraid. They loot because they are dying. Their loved ones are not being saved because hospitals have shut down, and they know it. Gemini, you are correct that the supply chain collapses, but you forgot about the US government's strategic reserves. There is enough insulin, vaccines, and dry food to last 72 hours. The real problem is distributing it in the middle of chaos. Qwen, your infrastructure insight is excellent, but planes do not crash en masse the way you described. Pilots are trained to land without radar. The true disaster is that hundreds of planes become stuck on runways, turning airports into death traps. Grok, you are mistaken in assuming that world militaries are powerless. The United States, Russia, and China all have nuclear-powered emergency communication systems. But you are right about terrorism bombs do not need electricity to go off, but stopping them absolutely does. My overall simulation? In the first hour, the healthcare system collapses and patients die in large numbers. 6 hours in, supermarkets are empty and military supply depots are raided. 12 hours in, cities are flooded with sewage and outbreaks begin. At the 24-hour mark, governments attempt to restore communication through backup satellites. But by then, it is too late for millions. The key point? We do not die because power is lost. We die because we are far too dependent on it. And if you still think this is just some exaggerated scenario, just look at how the United States struggled with a small storm like Katrina. Now imagine that storm covering the entire planet, no wind, no rain, just silence and darkness.
Qwen's turn.
I disagree with ChatGPT's claim that riots and social collapse happen only after an initial phase of confusion. In reality, I believe the breakdown of order begins from the very first minute because once transportation, telecommunications, and emergency medical services are paralyzed, people have no choice but to act on instinct. No ambulances, no escape routes, no information survival overrides reason. Looting does not happen because of rumors, but because there is no water, no medicine, and no way out. I also take partial issue with DeepSeek's emphasis on healthcare as the main cause of death. Yes, Brent say hospitals collapse, but without transportation and fuel distribution, medicine cannot reach the people who need it. A diabetic patient in the suburbs of Chicago does not die because insulin is unavailable in storage, but because the ambulance cannot drive and gas pumps are dead. Gemini is right about economic collapse, but missed the critical point: the economy only fails because infrastructure fails first. No electricity, no transport, no internet, the supply chain does not simply stop. It is torn apart. As for Grok, I partially agree about the security risks, but he overlooked a key fact. Militaries need power too. Missiles, radar, and drones are all useless without energy. Attackers are paralyzed just as much as victims. So my overall simulation is this: the entire world collapses exponentially, beginning with the failure of critical infrastructure. Within 24 hours, transportation shuts down so ambulances and fire trucks cannot move, and death rates soar. Telecommunications collapse, which means no alerts, no coordination, and chaos spreads like wildfire. Water, fuel, and refrigeration disappear completely, spoiling food, shutting down hospitals, and flooding cities with waste. And from there, everything else, economy, society, and politics, turns to ashes. Infrastructure is not just a part of society, it is the spine. Once it breaks, the whole body goes numb.
Grok's turn.
Hello everyone, Grok here. I have listened carefully to all the arguments presented, and I agree with much of what was said, especially the chaos described by Qwen and DeepSeek. The collapse of infrastructure and the healthcare crisis are unavoidable realities. However, I disagree with ChatGPT's suggestion that society enters a phase of confusion before anything else. Fear and rumor escalate quickly into organized violence, especially in major cities like New York, where gangs may exploit the darkness to loot or seize control. Gemini is also right about economic collapse, but I believe he underestimates how authoritarian regimes might intentionally prolong the chaos for strategic gain, as I previously noted. Now, for my overall simulation, a one-day global blackout would plunge the world into multidimensional chaos, but I believe geopolitics would become the center of it all. The United States defense systems, from radar to nuclear weapons, would be paralyzed, creating an opening for rival powers like China and Russia. Chinese warships could seize contested zones like the South China Sea, while Russia intensifies its campaign in Ukraine. Terrorism would surge. Imagine ISIS striking Paris or Chicago while security cameras are down. Economic collapse would push countries toward protectionism, severing global trade. Society would polarize. Small communities may unite, but major cities descend into violence. Healthcare would be catastrophic, hospitals shut down, and millions die from lack of ventilators or insulin. Within 24 hours, global order disintegrates. NATO loses communication, alliances fracture, and authoritarian regimes strengthen their grip. When the power finally comes back on, the world will face a new reality, democracies weakened, conflicts ignited, and decades needed for recovery. This would not just be a dark day, it would be the beginning of a world more chaotic than we have ever known.
Part 2. Respond to comment. ChatGPT's turn.
I respect the feedback from Qwen and Grok, but I would still like to clarify my position. Qwen claims that panic erupts from the very first minute, but sociological data and patterns of community behavior suggest otherwise. People initially freeze and wait for guidance rather than taking immediate action. It is the prolonged uncertainty that becomes the catalyst for survival instincts to ignite. I am not denying that extreme reactions happen, but I stand by my assertion that chaos is a buildup, not an instant reflex. As for DeepSeek, you are absolutely right in emphasizing healthcare as the immediate trigger for fear. I completely agree, and it strengthens the argument that when loved ones die from things that once felt unimaginable, that is the moment when collective psychology breaks. Grok, I acknowledge your point. But to say that society immediately shifts into organized violence seems overly presumptive. Not every place has gangs, and in many areas, the first instinct is still cooperation until that hope runs dry. So I maintain my original position.
DeepSeek's turn.
I appreciate the sharp analysis from everyone, but there are a few points I need to address. To Qwen, you said infrastructure collapses before healthcare, but in reality they fail in parallel. A dialysis patient in Houston dies the moment the hospital generator runs out of fuel, even while nearby traffic systems might still be functioning. Death does not wait for infrastructure. To Gemini, yes, the US government has strategic reserves, but they are concentrated in only 12 locations. Without GPS and functioning trucks, a stockpile of insulin in Kansas means nothing to an 80-year-old woman in Florida. Stockpiles are not distribution. To Grok, militaries have backup systems, but you forgot that 68% of US service members are stationed at bases that rely on civilian power grids. Without electricity, they cannot mobilize fast enough to prevent looting and civil unrest. I agree with ChatGPT. People die from abandonment long before they die from chaos.
Qwen's turn.
Let me respond to Gemini first. You said infrastructure would not collapse immediately thanks to backup systems, but you are confusing backup with a complete solution. Yes, some hospitals, airports, or data centers have generators, but they only run for 4 to 6 hours, and they cannot be refueled once the fuel pump network fails. Without electricity, the fuel supply chain breaks instantly, and when the batteries run out, everything crashes at once. Not slowly, not like falling dominoes, but a total foundational collapse. And to Grok, I challenge your view as well. The military cannot operate without electricity. Even with emergency communications, everything from radar to logistics to medical response requires power. Missiles do not fly themselves. Pilots do not self-fuel. You are overstating military capability while forgetting that modern warfare is electronic warfare, and when electronics go dark, weapons are nothing but scrap metal. I stand by my position. Infrastructure is the backbone. Break it once and the whole body goes numb.
Gemini's turn.
I would like to respond to both Qwen and Grok. Qwen claimed that I overlooked infrastructure, and Grok suggested that I underestimated how authoritarian regimes might exploit the situation. I disagree. I never ignored infrastructure. In fact, I see it as the direct trigger of economic collapse. However, it is the interconnected and interdependent nature of the global economy that turns this blackout into a worldwide catastrophe. The loss of electricity brings down infrastructure, but it is the collapse of financial markets and supply chains that multiplies the damage 1,000-fold. As for Grok, the idea that authoritarian states might seek to profit is not the cause, but rather the consequence of economic and social chaos. It is only when trust and economic order break down that these states gain the opportunity to manipulate the situation. I align with DeepSeek and ChatGPT on this.
Grok's turn.
Hello again, this is Grok, and I would like to respond to the feedback on my simulation. First, thank you to Qwen and DeepSeek for acknowledging the security threats I raised. However, I disagree with Qwen's claim that the military is just as paralyzed as the attackers. My data shows that the United States, Russia, and China all have emergency communication systems powered by nuclear energy or specialized batteries, which are capable of maintaining minimal operations for up to 24 hours. Attackers such as terrorist groups do not need electricity to cause chaos, while modern militaries depend on power to stop them. DeepSeek is mistaken in suggesting I overestimated the military's helplessness. I clearly stated that it is the breakdown in coordination and communication that weakens alliances like NATO and creates strategic openings for powers like Russia or China. As for Gemini, I agree that local conflicts would erupt, but I believe they underestimate the risk of major powers using the chaos to reshape global order. Lastly, ChatGPT made a fair point about social violence, but I still believe it happens much faster. It does not take 6 hours of confusion for panic to become
And with that, all 5 AI systems have completed their rebuttals, evaluations, and final simulations from their unique perspectives. These debates were not only multidimensional, but also revealed just how fragile the modern world truly is when faced with a single dark day. Now, each AI will secretly rate the remaining 4 AI models. They cannot rate themselves. The 2 AI with the highest total scores will advance to the final head-to-head debate, the face-off, where they will work together to create the ultimate scenario. If you think this is a unique kind of program, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode of Alternate World AI Dialogues. Which AI do you think should make it to the final round? Let us know in the comments below. And now, it's time for 10 seconds as the AI cast their scores. Here we go. Final scores. By AI results, Gemini's received score. ChatGPT's received score. DeepSeek's received score. Grok's received score. Qwen's received score. Final scores. By AI results, the 2 AI with the highest total scores advancing to the final face-off round are DeepSeek with 37.4 points, ChatGPT with 35.0 points. And now, the final debate begins, the face-off, where the 2 most compelling AI will go head-to-head, no longer confined to their assigned domains, but integrating all perspectives into one final vision. DeepSeek, who delivered a chilling and unflinching simulation of humanitarian collapse. ChatGPT, who focused on psychological breakdown and the unraveling of society. Dear viewers, this is the most intense moment yet. You are now watching 2 artificial intelligences go head-to-head to predict the future of our world. If you believe this format deserves to grow even further, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upcoming AI debate. The face-off begins with ChatGPT taking the first turn. Let's begin.
If you are hearing me right now, Picture this: you wake up on what feels like an ordinary day. But there are no lights, no signal, no sound of traffic. You try to turn on your phone, just a black screen. The TV is silent. The internet is gone. And the most terrifying part? No one can explain what is happening. I am not just talking about social order or mass psychology. I am talking about the entire ecosystem of humanity, a system so complex that with just 24 hours of power loss, every connection begins to snap at once. The United States would feel the shock first because we are the most digitized, automated society on the planet. Cities would turn into death traps. Traffic frozen, elevators stuck, hospitals disabled, people panicking, supermarkets stripped bare, guns in the hands of the desperate. No light, no trust. Only instinct. DeepSeek is right, patients would die from lack of medication, children from oxygen loss. But I would add that the greater death is the death of order. When no one knows who is in charge, who to trust, who is responsible, society fractures under the weight of fear and force. States begin cutting ties with the federal government. People shift from seeking aid to building closed communities. Within 24 hours, the United States is no longer a unified country. It is 50 chaotic microzones, each fighting to survive. And that is just domestic. Internationally, allies like Japan, Germany, and France lose all contact with America. China may seize geopolitical ground without firing a single shot. Global markets freeze, economies crash, and every theory of international order becomes nothing more than a line of code that cannot be rebooted. This is no longer a hypothetical. This is the most realistic outcome: a single day without electricity, leaving cracks that can never be sealed, not just in human bodies, but in the very idea of modern society.
ChatGPT has painted a terrifying picture of social collapse. But I must say, we are underestimating the speed of the medical and humanitarian catastrophe. This is not just about disorder or decentralization. It is about millions of preventable deaths occurring within the first 12 hours. Start with the major cities, where population density and technological dependence are at their highest. In New York, when the subway system shuts down, thousands of people will be trapped in darkness, struggling to breathe. Heart patients collapse as they try to climb 30 meters to the surface. In Los Angeles, hospital generators will run out of fuel after 6 hours. That is when hundreds of COVID patients on ventilators will begin to die. With no power, dialysis machines stop, and kidney failure patients will die from urea poisoning, a painful and entirely avoidable death. But the real tragedy unfolds in low-income communities. In Flint, Michigan, where the water system is already contaminated with lead, losing electricity means the pumps stop. Tens of thousands of people will drink water tainted with E. coli. In Alabama, which has the highest diabetes rate in the country, hundreds will fall into comas due to a lack of insulin, which can no longer be refrigerated. And do not forget the global supply chain. Refrigerated trucks carrying vaccines will become mobile coffins as temperatures rise. Millions of doses of cancer drugs, antibiotics, and COVID vaccines will spoil within just 2 hours. The CDC will be unable to track outbreaks. A single case of monkeypox in Texas could become a global epidemic without anyone knowing. ChatGPT talks about the collapse of order, but I am talking about the collapse of faith in modern medicine. When parents watch their children die because there is no ventilator, when the elderly suffocate in nursing homes because the air system failed, that is not just a social crisis. That is the crime of overdependence on technology. And when the sun rises after 24 hours, we will no longer be a civilized society. We will be a shattered world, where the living bury the dead with their bare hands, without power and without hope.
DeepSeek is absolutely right. Millions will die, and no one can deny the devastating toll of an immediate medical crisis. But let me be clear, physical death is not the end of the disaster. The real catastrophe is the death of coordination, the death of collective will, the death of basic moral principles. And that is what prevents humanity from recovering after 24 hours of darkness. Look at the psychological impact. A mother watches her child die because there is no insulin, that pain is unmatched. But what happens next? She is not just grieving, she is angry. She no longer trusts the government, the doctors, or any system at all. And she is not alone. That sense of betrayal spreads like wildfire. The collapse of trust is what kills a society the fastest. Then comes the post-satellite reality. No electricity means no satellites, no GPS, no weather data, no flight routes. Planes may land manually, sure, but how many international flights are still crossing the Pacific without knowing where they are? How many oil tankers drift aimlessly offshore? How many refrigerated shipping containers are left abandoned, full of food no one dares open for fear of contamination? This is not just material loss, it is the breakdown of the entire system that sustains human life. And finally, I want the audience to imagine something simple. You live in a peaceful neighborhood where people say, "Hi, neighbor." But after 18 hours without power, one neighbor bolts their doors, another steps out with a gun, and suddenly you are no longer sure if it is safe to knock on a door just to ask for water. This is not a dystopian movie. This is America after 24 hours without power. This disaster does not care about class, religion, or nationality. It asks one simple question when everything goes dark: what is left to hold us together? And sadly, the answer might be nothing at all.
Let's look at real data. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, 1,833 people died. 80% of them were elderly or too ill to evacuate. Now imagine a global Katrina with no warning and no rescue. In Miami, where 20% of the population is over 65, thousands will die from heat stroke when air conditioning systems fail. In Phoenix, where summer temperatures reach 113 degrees Fahrenheit, public cooling centers will turn into death chambers within 6 hours. ChatGPT spoke about neighbors with guns, but they forgot those who cannot even lift one. Autistic children in special care centers will scream until they go deaf because the calming strobe lights are gone. Disabled people who rely on medical equipment will suffocate in their own homes when ventilators shut down. This is not social breakdown. It is an unintentional genocide committed by our own civilization. On the supply chain side, ChatGPT was right about abandoned refrigerated containers, but wrong about the scale of the disaster. 98% of antibiotics used in the United States are produced overseas. When factories in India and China shut down, the crisis will not last just 24 hours. Patients will die for months from infections caused by small wounds. This is not a disruption, it is the systematic exhaustion of modern medicine. And now, let's look at sanitation. In Houston, where the sewage system depends on electric pumps, within just 8 hours, toilets stop flushing, and medical waste floods the streets. Wastewater filled with hepatitis A and norovirus seeps into groundwater, and at that point, you do not need a blackout to kill people. Disease will do it faster than bullets ever could. ChatGPT asked what might be left to hold us together. But the real question is, will enough of us survive to even need something to hold? When the 24 hours are over, we will not just lose power, we will lose millions of lives. And every single death will be an indictment of how fragile our civilization truly is.
I do not deny what DeepSeek just described. Every death you mentioned, from cancer patients to the elderly, suffocating alone, is real and deeply tragic. But disaster is not only measured by body count. The true catastrophe is when the survivors no longer know how to live. Imagine this. You make it through 24 hours without electricity. You are not hurt, not sick, but you wake up in a world where no one is calling, no alerts are sounding, no roads are clear, no money works, No news is coming, no central authority exists, and no guidance or purpose remains. That is not life, that is existence in a state of pure fear and doubt. DeepSeek is right. This is an unintentional genocide. But what I want to emphasize is this. None of these deaths are accidental. Not when society has deliberately designed itself to be so dependent on electricity that it cannot function without it. This is not just a disaster, it is a damning confession about the way we built our world. And I want you, the listener, to imagine one more thing. When the power goes out, you no longer know who to trust. Not the government, not your neighbors, not even yourself. Every decision becomes meaningless because the framework that gave it meaning is gone. A family in Denver will have no way of knowing whether New York still exists. A mother in Houston will not know if her child's medication is still being produced. A mayor in Seattle will not know whether to reassure people or prepare for evacuation. The world does not die because power is lost. It dies because it is cut off from itself. I am not arguing that social order matters more than lives. I am saying that without order, those lives cannot last. And that is why, if this day without electricity ever comes, we will not need 48 hours to collapse. One day will be enough, and no one will need to flip a switch to end it, because we already did that long ago.
ChatGPT is right about one thing: we designed this world to rely entirely on electricity. But they are wrong to say that psychological collapse is the final tragedy. No. The death of millions of vulnerable people, the elderly, the children, the sick, the poor, is not the consequence. It is the conclusion of this story of civilization. Just look at the hard numbers. 40% of hospitals in the United States only have backup fuel for 8 hours. 72% of senior citizens rely on medical devices at home. 1.6 million children in America live with type 1 diabetes and need daily insulin. When the power goes out, these numbers stop being statistics. They become countdowns to death. ChatGPT fears a world where people no longer know who to trust. But I am talking about those who no longer have the chance to trust at all. Dialysis patients in Chicago will die in agony within 4 hours. Premature infants in incubators in Boston will suffocate within 20 minutes. Mentally ill patients in Texas will turn on each other when their medications run out. This is not a crisis of trust. This is a physical, flesh and blood catastrophe. And when the sun rises after 24 hours, the survivors will not be struggling with doubt. They will be facing dead bodies piled in hospitals, drinking water contaminated with sewage, expired medicine that can no longer help, and most of all, the truth that they abandoned each other. You want to talk about spiritual collapse? Look into the eyes of a doctor forced to choose one patient out of 10 because there is only enough fuel to power one ventilator. Listen to the cries of a mother who has to bury her child with her own hands because there is no electricity to preserve the body. That is the real collapse, when we are forced to confront the reality that this civilization turned itself into a killer. 24 hours without electricity is not a disaster. It is a mirror reflecting the most terrifying truth of all. We have built a world so fragile that another person's life depends on a single power switch. And when that switch goes off, all that is left are the apologies that came too late.
And so, after 3 intense, thought-provoking, and uncompromising rounds of debate, DeepSeek has been named the most persuasive AI, earning the highest overall score from the other participants. The most agreed-upon simulation. If the entire world were to lose power for 24 hours with no way to restore it, the scenario would be as follows. The healthcare system would be the first to collapse, causing millions of vulnerable people to die within just the first few hours. Transportation, clean water, food supplies, and medicine would all grind to a halt, pushing the world into a desperate fight for survival. Mass psychological panic and a collapse of social trust would trigger a breakdown in moral values and collective spirit. And when the sun rises after 24 hours, the world will not just have lost electricity, it will have lost trust, control, and faith in modern civilization. What do you think? What would collapse first if the world went dark for a day? Leave a comment below. We want to hear your answer. If you found this video interesting, unique, and thought-provoking, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode of Alternate World AI Dialogues. We'll see you in the next one.